Hi, this is Adam,
I'm Dave.
and you're listening to Fiction.
Or nonfiction.
Cue music.
Fiction. Or nonfiction.
Hey, so this is the program where we go through viral news stories, historic documents, and try to determine if some famous stories and allegations happen to be true or false, if they happen to be fiction or
Nonfiction.
Dave, the last time we spoke, it was around Halloween time, so it's been a fair bit, but it's been a very busy November. But I understand you're coming to me with a very interesting factoid slash story slash debunkable slash lots of slashes slash provable piece of information.
Sure. I'm gonna do a little bit of a historical fact or fiction like I've done in the past.
Well, that would de facto make it historical if you did it in the past, right?
Maybe. But anyways, I'm gonna talk about, yes, you guessed it, ATM machines.
Woo! But Dave, this is unprecedented. I think this is the first time you've contributed something that's not about food.
Well, you can use money to get food.
You know, never mind.
All right. So anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to tell me if it's fact or fiction. I'll give a bit of history, and I have a few things like that here to discuss the history of ATMs.
Wonderful. Now, first off, an ATM
Yes.
is not a robot from Star Wars. It is an automatic teller machine.
Yes, it's what you put your bank card in, you put your code in, and then it gives you money from your
Ye-
bank account.
Was that the question? Did I spoil it?
Actually, I'm leaving. No, my question is to you. The ATM, in its earliest form, when was it first introduced to the public? Now, was it introduced in 1975, 1990, or 1967?
Ooh, interesting. The 70s were all about computers. You know, people were really into punch cards and wearing, pocket calculators within said pockets. I'm going to go for the 75.
Okay. You are incorrect.
Well, good night, everyone.
Actually, the very first cash machine that was installed and made available to the public was in June of 1967.
Well, hot darn it.
Now, it was a little bit more rudimentary, I guess, or primitive compared to what we use now.
So what was in it? Was it just like a short person like putting bills through like a feeder? Is that what happened?
Actually, you're not far off there. But the very first ATM machine was introduced in the United Kingdom, in the UK. That's where it was invented. Although there's a lot of different sources, kind of like when we talked in the past about who invented light bulbs or electricity, or like who discovered it.
I was going to say no one invented electricity.
Or
did they?
Or did they? But there's a lot of different accounts and different, because a lot of people were having a similar thought around this time, which is, how do I get my cash faster?
Mm-hmm.
How do I get my cash when the bank is closed? Because back then, if the bank was closed, you couldn't get money. You had to wait till the next day.
And the UK is very synonymous with bank holidays. There's
Yeah.
quite a few of them throughout the calendar year, so that does make quite a bit of sense.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a bit about the inventor of this, because that is also disputed. There's a lot of people you could argue for, but there's two main people that take the claim for the invention and first use of the bank machine.
So
publicly.
they're basically like claiming credit, saying that they're the ones that designed or created the original model. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Yes. So
Thomas Edison.
No.
Oh. Leonardo da Vinci.
Close, but no.
Okay.
Actually, not even close. The inventor of the ATM machine, the very first one, was actually Shepard Barron. That was his,
which is a great name. What is with you coming with all these great inventor names?
Well, actually, that's his last name, I should say.
Shepard Barron is a last name?
Shepard-Barron. Hold on, I have his full name
He's a
here.
baron of shepherds. Wow.
John Shepard Barron.
A very English name, I will say.
Yeah, and it was invented and introduced in the UK. But the very first form of the bank machine did not have a plastic debit card with a pin.
Mm-hmm.
It took the form, the plastic card took the form, it had like holes punched in it. So
like a punch card.
Yes. So basically, what you would do is you would have this card. It was like a punch card, but it used checks. And instead of the plastic cards, it used checks that had this radioactive carbon-14 substance on it.
What is with this season and radioactivity?
I don't know, but this machine would detect this carbon-14 mildly radioactive substance.
Just mildly.
And then you would have to put in a PIN, and the PIN paid out cash. Now, back then, you couldn't get that much cash.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the maximum was between 10 and 30 pounds.
But then that's
time.
1967 money, so
Yeah.
that's like a whole like acreage worth of funds.
Yes. So basically, this first model, this is how it kind of went. And what's interesting is the way that Shepard Barron came up with the idea for doing a bank machine, and he presented it to the Barclays Bank, which is a big bank in the UK at the time. He was at a vending machine getting a chocolate bar, and he said, "Why can't I replace the chocolate bar with cash?"
What if instead of taking my money, it gave me money?
That's right. And
I say the same thing every time I have to pay a bill. What if you paid me?
Right. And this was also there was no bank fees for using a different bank machine from a different bank like that happens now. There's no transaction fees.
Mm-hmm.
This was still a new thing. And then the other person that gets credit, which is interesting because he kind of built on Shepard Barron's model. He was a development engineer in Glasgow.
Oh, so Scotland.
Yeah.
Okay.
Part of Smith Industries. And his name was James Goodfellow. Now, what he did was he patented the first ATM machine and created the first PIN code on a card. Not a punch card with radioactive material.
Which is usually a good design principle in general.
So he kind of gets the credit for doing that. But again, the version of the ATM card at that time was still nowhere near to what it's like now. But what's interesting about Goodfellow is he did the patent, and he was rewarded with £10.
10 pounds of what?
Money. For this invention, and which is equivalent at the time to $15.
Ooh, that's
now,
a ripoff. Wow,
you'd figure for someone that had a patent, and for a thing that went worldwide eventually, and people use it. They don't even go in banks sometimes. There's even drive-throughs now where you can go and if you want, and you don't even have to go in a building.
Mm-hmm. You don't have to encounter any people for most of your financial transactions.
Right.
Yeah.
Both of these inventors / engineers did receive recognition later on, but beyond that, they never really received anything else. But that's kind of a little bit of history on the ATM machine. I'm not going to go too in depth to that, but there's a couple other things that I wanted to also ask you about on this edition.
I was going to say, it's not my PIN number for my bank card, is it?
I wasn't going to do that.
It's
but
4.
I'm hoping that you say it publicly.
Everyone, it's 4.
But what's interesting about how they decided on 4 numbers. Originally, the machine, when Shepard Barron was working on it, he wanted to do 6 numbers. But people, and especially his wife, was having trouble remembering 6 digits as opposed to 4. 4 was easier. So they just went with 4.
What an exciting origin story.
Because now you know the origin story.
Don't they say that even monkeys can memorize 7 numbers? Chimpanzees. They're not monkeys.
Before bank machines, there's also a little bit of history. In Japan, they had a device called a computer loan machine. It supplied cash as a 3-month loan at 5% interest.
So how would you pay it back is my question. Like, would you have to put physical currency within a machine? Would it belong to a financial institution?
Yeah, it was through the bank.
Okay, so you'd probably physically
owe money
enter
to
a
the
bank, and then
yeah.
you'd pay it with the loan interest. A very interesting concept in that regard.
Yeah, so some of this information I should mention because, as we always stress on fiction and nonfiction, sources are important. Where are you getting your information from? Who's it coming from? Where, when, how, what, what,
and why?
Actually,
that one doesn't apply. But honestly, what are the sources?
So there's a variety of sources for this. Of course, there's Wikipedia, which you shouldn't always trust, but there's some sources at the bottom that kind of reference this. But there was also Time Magazine has a lot. Had some articles about this. There's also a story a couple of years back on The Guardian CTV also did an article about it in 2009, about 40 years of ATMs, and also History.com, who's notable for even explicitly putting after every article about fact-checking and their sources.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit of history, but my next question for you for fiction or nonfiction, as I ruffle these papers.
There's multiple?
There's multiple questions.
Well, you do have a lot of papers in your hand.
When?
Are those your bank statements?
No.
Okay.
When was the first ATM open for business in the United States of America?
1975.
Hold on, I was going to give you some choices.
Okay.
1975, 1968,
Ooh.
or 1969?
I'm going to go with my gut, 75.
Again, you are wrong.
Okay, 69.
Yes, on September 2nd, 1969, America's first ATM made its public debut through Chemical Bank in Rockville Center in New York.
Wait, what month was that?
September 2nd.
Oh, so that's not what Summer of 69 was about. Sorry, Bryan Adams fans.
It was about ATM machines.
Okay.
But by the 1980s, obviously, these machines were used more, and they dispensed cash widely. In December 1st, 1969, the first 24-hour access to a cash machine came to Canada. That was through the CIBC, Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. And earlier, the introduction for the ATMs was in 1967 in the UK. I can go into more detail on this.
Please do.
But ATMs could spit a single transaction. Consumers could get $30 in packets, which meant you could get $30.
Oh, so like in packets. So like you can only
packets.
take out $30 at a time.
So you could get up to $1,000. Like in packets,
interesting.
like 30, 30, 30, which is weird because now we do like 20s.
Yeah. A very odd number.
That was in 85. Sorry, 1970, as I mentioned.
That's a very odd number. But I guess they had to break up 20s and 10s, and 20s weren't as prevalent back then because obviously inflation has gone up.
Inflation has gone up. According to a 1986 study/research, this comes from a history article that was done for CTV in 2009. So in 2008, what was the maximum number of transactions that were logged from the Canadian Bankers Association reports?
Total average?
Yeah.
30,000.
No, like in all of
Million.
Canada.
Oh, in all of Canada. 30 million.
Okay. Not close.
20?
257 million transactions in 2008 were made at cash machines. bank
Why do you
machines.
spend all your money all the time, people?
I
Just
don't-
go to the library
I
and get
don't
stuff for
know.
free.
But yeah, that's quite a lot. Now, people think that the number of bank tellers have dropped, and they have a little bit, but not as much as you would have guessed. Well, according to this study from 2009 that was published.
And who was the study conducted by?
the-
Was it by Bank Tellers Anonymous?
No, it was the same study here that I'm talking about from the
Oh,
CTV
okay.
article from 2009,
Which is fairly reputable, I would
which
say.
was, they got a whole bunch of facts here, but you can find it. It was published November 23rd, 2009. And it's called ATMs, 40 Years of 24-Hour Dough. Not donuts, money.
That would be great if it was dough.
Do you know what? Why don't they have ATMs that dispense donuts?
I think
24
those are
hours a
called
day?
vending machines.
Yeah, but like faster.
You can't argue with that.
So the number of frontline staff hasn't really dropped, but it hasn't really gone up. They have definitely decreased since the introduction of ATMs, especially when they went more worldwide. But all the growth over the past 20 years, it has been displaced slightly by technology. So there are less, but there's not just one person in a bank. Hopefully it's never just one person in a bank.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I got here for my history of ATMs. But I'm not done.
What?
I'm not done.
Okay. Well,
Do you have any questions for me?
about ATMs?
Yeah.
What brought the subject up?
What brought the subject up? Actually, I was trying to find something interesting and historical that we use every day that we could talk about on the show. And at the time, I had to go to the bank before work, so I went to the ATM, and I was like, ATMs, when was the first ATM? When was the first ATM card? And that's
You
kinda
almost
what
went
started.
Seinfeld on that. ATMs. What's with that?
What's the
What's
deal with ATMs?
Listen, I don't know.
But anyways,
We're gonna cut that.
here's another question I'll add. Last little factoid, maybe two, if you'd like to discuss.
Well, then I'll have something to ask you, but go on.
The very first, in Canada, when was the very first transaction fee for using an ATM with your card? Was it 1990, 1999, or 1980?
I'm going to go with 1980 because if there's one thing I know about financial institutions, they love making money.
They do. But in the 1990s, that's when banks began charging ATM fees.
Well, I am completely wrong. I think I did a hat trick of wrong answers for this one.
Yeah, you did. So according to legislation passed in 1996, New York's ATM Safety Act also required banks to install such things such as surveillance cameras, reflective mirrors, and locked entryways for the ATMs for the public safety. So there's some factoids for you, cataloging the history of ATMs. I got a lot of that from history.com. There's an article about September 2nd, 1969, which was when the first ATM opened in America. So, yeah, did you have any questions for me, Adam?
I have a question. This is about ATM safety and security, because you did bring up how there were cameras that were implemented there as a security measure. Do you know why that was?
I'm assuming it's because of theft and people trying to steal money from ATMs, but I did not look up that information prior to this episode. Do you have that information on hand?
Well, I've been looking up some information because it's very interesting to see the number of crimes that are actually committed at ATMs. Because so far you would assume it would be people trying to, break into ATMs? That's not the case. So the major issue actually comes from people being robbed after withdrawing cash. So you've probably seen this in dozens of movies, especially it seemed like there was no end of sight of movies set in New York where people take money out of an ATM or some sort of teller machine, they turn around, a mugger just grabs their purse or their wallet and runs away. Well, that is actually a huge issue. In fact, across the world, there are over 5 million ATMs, and from those, the most common threat are actually, again, robbery. Apparently, the UK police arrested 22 people in connection with a string of over 40 attacks on ATMs across England, Wales, and Scotland in the spring of 2021. Now, just in case you're wondering where that comes from the Pinkerton.com blog, which is, of course, an organization that looks at retail crime and theft within the UK and Commonwealth regions. So that's actually something to be concerned about in terms of what you can do to secure yourself. It's best not to go to an ATM that's in a poorly lit area or a poorly lit street. If you have to remove funds after business hours, try to do it before it gets really dark, and maybe bring someone along with you just so you have an extra pair of eyes, just to be aware of your surroundings. And that's really the safety recommendations.
And that's another reason they have the doors locked. As I mentioned, that in the mid-90s, they had a new act that was introduced, and they had surveillance cameras and stuff like that. That's another reason. Like, you can't go into a bank if you don't belong to that bank mostly, because in some places, because it's locked. So you need your actual card in order to get into the building.
Which I've always questioned about that, because you'd figure there would be better security methods beyond that. But, again, that was implemented mainly as a deterrent for people loitering around within closed doors areas where there was an automatic teller machine. So people, for example, couldn't squat there overnight.
Yeah.
There's definitely an ethical conversation to have around that. But, at the same time, this was also put in as a security method in order to prevent assaults and robberies from occurring.
Yeah. That's something we didn't look too in-depth to. I was mostly going for the historical angle.
I think I covered some history.
You covered some good history.
Thank you.
I thank you for that. I know this was primarily an episode where I looked up stuff, although you did have some stuff there.
You're welcome.
Which was great. Do you think we should do a random Dave fact?
Well, we could. I don't know. Do you want to do a random Dave fact, or would you like a weird Adam question?
I'd like a weird Adam question.
Okay.
And I'll do this fact later.
Oh, okay. Dave, my random Adam question for you. Since we don't have a Dave question, since you were already asking questions,
Yeah.
what is copypasta?
Is it someone mistakenly saying copy and paste wrong?
Kind of, sort of.
Okay.
So here's my thing. I'd like to present a question rather than just an outright fact. And so what I want to present to you is a question about copypasta. You are on the right trajectory. Have you ever heard of this term before?
I have.
Okay. Just given the name of it, what would you assume that it is?
It's a way to artificially create pasta without having to boil it.
I wish.
Okay, then it's not.
Haruki Murakami would love that. But no. This is kind of derivative off of the terms copy and paste, as you said, which is a computer function to copy text and then paste it into the body of a field. And it's also slightly derivative of creepypasta. Do you know what creepypasta is? And don't say it's a scary linguini.
I don't know then.
Okay, so basically it's a short story or screen grab that's shared online, usually on the creepypasta forum itself, that is just like a little horror story that people share and gains kind of meme-like, I guess you could say, popularity. Think of Slender Man as an example, who started out as a creepypasta.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know how he's so slender with all that pasta he's eating, but, it's amazing.
All those carbs,
You'd figure, well,
they gotta go somewhere.
He's pretty quick. He moves around very quickly, so that's he burns it off. Well, basically copypasta, that's the etymology of it, but it's a block of text copied and pasted to the internet and social media. So why do you think I'm bringing this up?
I don't know.
Well, copypasta started off as pretty innocuous. The most famous one was, I think, one that you have seen firsthand. It's the B movie copypasta.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, I think you have. The entire screenplay of the 2007 animated movie B Movie is copy-pasted onto different social media forums, such as a Facebook post or an Instagram reel.
Okay.
And it just started out as basically an absurdist sort of joke. It didn't really hold any water, but then copypasta kind of became notorious because people would start copying, say, a B movie copypasta meme, not really knowing what it meant, but just kind of sharing it because people on social media platforms like Facebook and then, our long forgotten Tumblr just love sharing stuff. It's just about copying and pasting and sharing, not really getting it. And this created a problem, not so much for this particular meme, but on large. What do you think the problem is with that?
Where the stuff's coming from?
And
Copyright?
also what's being said.
Okay.
So an example of this is probably to do with the Trump administration. This was widely reported, taking place in 2020 at the tail end of the presidency of one Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially what happened was that the president announced his and the First Lady, Melania Trump's COVID-19 diagnosis via Twitter, of course. And social media exploded. Now, amid your usual well wishes for a speedy recovery, and those who are kind of vitriolic, wishing, no recovery from the diagnosis because, a very polarizing political figure, Twitter users also started responding with messages paired with creepy images. And then when translated from Amharic to English, which was the original language, the messages warned of a sinful soul beyond salvation.
Okay.
Basically, what happened was that this was just a copypasta that was applied to a popular tweet, i.e. about the President of the United States at the time, that gained traction and people started spreading it. It was fairly innocuous. It was just a very insensitive tweet that was meant to rile up fear that maybe this was some sort of vaguely terroristic act or warning. But meanwhile, it was just someone trolling the internet, just attaching this to the tweet.
So it became a way to further spread misinformation.
Exactly. So this is something that has been of a concern because there's also been warnings that people have posted in block text. You've probably seen this on Instagram posts or Facebook posts where people have a block of text sharing some information such as, let's say, a conspiracy about QAnon. And then people just copy and paste it and it becomes copypasta.
So it just creates a trail of misinformation, kind of like the old game telephone.
Very much so. Only, unlike telephone, where people get to interpret and maybe misstate something, people are just copying the stuff verbatim. But as per what we always talk about, what's the problem with that?
No sources,
No sources.
no background. They don't know where it's coming from. They're just
Exactly.
copy pasting and believing it.
Exactly. So there's no authenticizing. Like this has been a problem in social media realms for a long time where people just take Uncle Steve's Facebook post on, on just faith that it's true. It's like, well, the Queen of England is secretly a reptile. Like, that's got to be true. Uncle Steve wouldn't lie. And when you ask Uncle Steve where he got it from, he's like, oh, I found it on, a Facebook post from Reg down the street. Where did Reg get it from? And it goes on from there and there. It gains traction. It starts swaying people to believe ridiculous, sometimes inflammatory things. And then before you know it, yeah, it becomes viral and something like QAnon really blows up. So
copypasta is basically a lot of different copy and pastes of things that don't necessarily come from a reliable source or whatever, and it just kind of spreads further.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And they're not coming from reputable sources sometimes. In fact, mostly it's user generated.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's no way to actually track the original source of it unless someone is laying claim to it on a web forum of some type, it just goes out there into the world and there's no way to tell whether it's authentic or not.
Here's a question I have for you. When people are doing the copy pasta, do they get hungry?
I think I'm always hungry when I'm online.
Okay.
Dave, before we go out, what's your favorite pasta?
I like a good penne, but you know what? I also really like fettuccine.
Those are some very basic pastas.
You know what? What's the one that's like curly? Rigatoni?
Rigatoni?
No.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't know. I like all pastas. I'm not pasta biased.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're not. For me, I'll always take a good ravioli.
Damn, that's a good answer.
Some stuffing in it, you're good.
Cheese ravioli?
Oh, you got it.
Oh man, can I change my answer?
No, too late. With that said, though, we found out about ATMs, we found about copy pasta, and I want to actually take some money out of an ATM to buy some pasta right now. So, Dave, do you have anything to say before we head out?
We didn't do one episode without referencing food.
Congratulations, Dave. Although, we do have to announce our season finale is coming up next episode. And who knows what our topic will be. But until then, this has been Adam.
I'm Dave.
And this has been Fiction.
Or nonfiction.